imagine you are running. Like you have booked a one-way ticket to the absolute furthest corner of the globe.
Right.
You tossed your smartphone into a river, disabled every single GPS tracker.
Just completely off the grid.
Yeah, completely. You lock yourself inside a windowless concrete room in some massive city where, like, literally no one knows your face or your name.
You think you are totally alone.
Right. You are entirely off the grid. Or, well, so you think. The theology we are unpacking today argues that in that specific moment, sitting in the dark, totally isolated from humanity, you are actually standing directly in front of the blinding face of the creator of the universe.
Where's a staggering thought?
It really is.
Yeah.
So, welcome to Reformed Thinking. This is a deep dive into the massive reality of divine immanence.
And we are bringing two really hefty theological texts to the table today.
They are. These sources, they meticulously dissect the doctrine of God's omnipresence, leaning pretty heavily on exegesis of Psalm 139.
Yeah, and they also offer a pretty severe critique of modern religious practices. They are looking at our current culture through the lens of historical Protestant theology.
Right. So our mission today is to unpack what it actually means for you, the listener, that the Creator is inescapably universally present.
And how grasping that reality shifts a person's entire outlook from, a state of frantic escapism to a posture of restful assurance.
Okay, let's unpack this. We really need to start at the bedrock of this concept.
We do. And to lay that groundwork properly, the sources point us straight to the Westminster Confession of Faith.
Specifically chapter 2, right?
Yeah, chapter 2, which deals with the nature of God and the Holy Trinity. The confession uses some very specific language here.
Okay, what does it say?
It states that God is infinite, immense, and without body or parts.
Wait, hold on a second. I want to stop on that word immense.
Sure.
Because, if I say a skyscraper is immense or like the Pacific Ocean is immense, I am talking about sheer physical volume.
Right, taking up space?
Yeah. I am talking about something that takes up a massive amount of physical room. So how is the theological use of that word different? Let's unpack the mechanism there.
Well, think of it this way. The ocean has a shoreline, A skyscraper has a roof and it has walls.
Yeah, they have limits.
Right. They contain a measurable amount of matter, even if that amount is totally massive. But in historic Christian theology, immense means unmeasurable by space itself.
Unmeasurable by space, meaning he is outside of it.
It means he is not bound by spatial dimensions at all. A physical body has parts. It takes up a specific volume. God, being a most pure spirit, does not take up space like, say, a gas expanding to fill a room.
Oh, wow. Okay, that is a big distinction.
It is. Space itself exists because he wills it to exist. He actively sustains all space and all time at every single moment.
Let me challenge that for a second, just to play devil's advocate.
Go for it.
If God is actively sustaining the space, taking up the room I am sitting in right now, how is that different from pantheism?
That is a great question.
Because, if he is holding the molecules of this wooden desk together right now, why isn't the desk God?
That brings up a critical distinction the sources make regarding ontology.
Ontology, meaning the nature of being.
Spot on. Ontology deals with the very nature of being. There is an impassable ontological gulf between the creator and the creature.
So they do not mix.
Right. Pantheism is the philosophical error that blends the divine substance with the material world. It argues that touching a tree is physically touching God.
Like the universe and God are one and the same.
Yes, but historic theology argues there is a complete difference in category between uncreated spirit and created matter.
So the desk is made of parts, it degrades, it is bound by time.
And the creator is pure spirit, eternal with no parts. So, he is present, willing the wood cells to hold together, but his divine essence never mixes with the carbon and the physical matter.
I see. He is transcendent above all his works, even while he is immanent within them.
That is it.
So pantheism absorbs him into the dirt and the trees. And the opposite error would be deism, right?
Yeah, deism is the other end of the spectrum.
The whole idea of God as the great clockmaker.
Correct. Deism suggests that God created the universe, wound up the mechanical laws of nature like a giant grandfather clock, and then just took a massive step back.
Leaving it all to run on its own.
Right. In that view, God is out there somewhere, completely detached from the daily operations of the cosmos.
Let's talk about the psychology of deism for a minute.
Okay.
Because, why is that specific error so incredibly appealing to the human mind?
Well, if God is an absentee landlord, you get to be the king of your own tiny castle.
Oh, wow. Yeah. You are in charge.
Right. A distant clockmaker does not evaluate your daily choices. A distant God does not demand holiness.
So deism offers the comfort of a designed universe, but without the terrifying accountability of an ever-present judge.
Yes, it allows human beings to maintain this illusion of absolute autonomy.
You know, we often treat God like a Wi-Fi router.
A Wi-Fi route, I like that.
Yeah, think about it. We assume the signal is really strong when we are sitting in a church pew on a Sunday morning.
5 bars.
Right, 5 bars.
Mm.
But if we wander too far away, or, if we go down into the basement of our bad choices, we assume the signal drops.
We lose connection.
We think the connection gets weak, the loading screen stalls, and we are suddenly out of range. We think our sin or our geography creates a dead zone.
That is a fantastic analogy, but the text insists there is no edge to the network.
No edge at all.
Zero signal degradation, no matter where you are in the universe. 10 million different conscious beings, standing at 10 million different points across the galaxies, can all say simultaneously, God is here, and it is absolutely true for every single one of them.
And that raises a very confronting issue for the individual listener. I mean, think about your own life right now.
The texts ask us to consider how often we operate as functional deists.
Functional deists, break that down.
A functional deist is someone who gives intellectual assent to the right doctrines on paper, but lives entirely differently.
So you might confess in Sunday service that God is everywhere.
Yet on a Tuesday afternoon, you live, you worry, you panic, and you act as if he is stationed millions of miles away in another galaxy.
That hits hard. Like we get a terrifying medical diagnosis, or we look at a looming financial crisis, and our immediate physical reaction is a massive spike of cortisol.
We stress out.
We stress out completely, as if God is currently out to lunch, and we have to handle the logistical nightmare until he gets back to the office.
We treat his presence as a localized phenomenon that we have to travel to, rather than the very atmosphere in which we live and move.
And that functional deism causes massive anxiety.
It really does. When you forget that he is universally present, you reduce your existence to a frantic scramble for control.
You assume the burden of running the universe, or at least running your own personal universe, rests entirely on your shoulders.
Which is an impossible weight to carry.
So if we are completely exposed, nowhere to hide, horizontally or vertically, what happens when we inevitably fail?
That is the big question.
Are we just trapped in a cage with a disappointed deity?
And that brings us directly to King David's massive realization in Psalm 139.
Psalm 139 is the theological anchor for this entire discussion, isn't it?
It is. And remember, King David is not writing from an academic desk.
Right, he was a real guy out in the dirt.
He is writing as a shepherd, a warrior, a king, and a man intimately acquainted with incredible triumph and devastating personal sin.
So we are looking specifically at verses 7 through 12 today. David asks two central rhetorical questions right out of the gate.
Yes. He asks, "Whither shall I go from thy spirit? Or whither shall I flee from thy presence?"
He is setting up an impossible scenario.
The linguistic choices here are vital. The source material dives into the specific Hebrew word studies.
Okay, let's hear the Hebrew.
When David says spirit, the Hebrew word is ruach.
Ruach.
And when he says presence, the literal Hebrew word is panim, which translates to face.
Face. Wow. So why is that distinction between a force and a phase so crucial? Why is a generic force easier to deal with than a person?
Well, a force can be managed.
How so?
You can build a lightning rod to divert electrical energy. You can build a dam to control the force of a river.
Right. You can harness it.
But ruach and panim indicate a personal, conscious agency. To flee from the panim, the face of God, means you are dealing with a personal encounter.
You are not trying to outrun gravity.
No, you are trying to evade a person who sees you, knows your underlying motives, and is actively evaluating you. You cannot manipulate a face the way you can manipulate a force.
David then goes on to test the boundaries of this reality. He starts mapping out the most extreme coordinates he can imagine.
He looks at the vertical extremes first.
He says, "If I ascend up into heaven, thou art there. If I make my bed in hell, behold, thou art there."
The Hebrew text requires a really close look here.
Okay, what are we looking at?
For ascending to heaven, David uses the word Isaac.
Isaac.
It is an incredibly rare word. In this exact verbal form, it appears only this one time in the entire Old Testament.
Just once.
Just once. It means to scale, to climb to the absolute highest possible human achievement or spiritual altitude.
So even if you build the tallest societal structure, or achieve the highest possible moral status. You cannot get above God.
You cannot outclimb his jurisdiction. He is already there waiting for you.
And then David swings the pendulum in the complete opposite direction to the ultimate depth. He uses the word Sheol.
Translated in older English versions as hell, Sheol specifically refers to the realm of the dead, the grave.
The text establishes a massive theological point with this word. David asserts that even physical death does not place a soul outside God's jurisdiction.
Which was huge back then. Let's provide some context for the listener on why that would have been an utterly radical concept in the ancient Near East.
Yeah, please do.
Ancient pagan myths were built entirely on the idea of localized deities. A god might rule a specific mountain or a river valley or a nation.
But the underworld,
That was ruled by a different god entirely. The ancient mind assumed that when you died, you passed out of the territory of the sky god and into the territory of the death god.
you crossed a literal border.
You crossed a border, but David abolishes that border completely. He says, no, Yahweh is in Sheol too.
You can die, you could be buried in the deepest grave, your physical body can decompose, and you have not moved a single inch away from the sovereign face of God.
Death changes a person's physical condition, but it does not change God's dominion. There is no off-grid location, not even in the afterlife.
So vertical escape is impossible. What about horizontal escape?
David brings up this incredibly poetic phrase. He says, if I take the wings of the morning and dwell in the uttermost parts of the sea.
The wings of the morning. That is beautiful. What does the Hebrew say there?
The Hebrew phrase is kanfei shachar. It signifies the speed of light reflecting off the dawn.
The speed of light.
Imagine the sun cresting the eastern horizon and that first blast of light shooting across the sky. David is essentially saying, if I could travel at the speed of light, flying as fast as the dawn itself.
And he aims that high-speed flight toward the uttermost parts of the sea.
Right. And for an ancient Israelite, that means the Mediterranean Sea to the west.
And to them, that was not just a body of water.
Not at all. That was the absolute boundary of the known world. It represented the abyss, chaos, the unknown edge of reality.
But the physics of this poetic thought experiment are staggering.
They really are. Even moving at 186,000 miles per second toward the farthest conceivable edge of the horizontal map provides zero escape.
You arrive at the edge of the universe only to find God already sitting there.
Exactly. I mean, spot on.
So vertical fails. Horizontal fails. So then David turns to the human mind's favorite trick concealment.
Ah, yes, hiding.
If I cannot outrun him, maybe I can just turn out the lights.
Think about your own habits right now.
Yeah. David says, if I say, surely the darkness shall cover me, even the night shall be light about me.
Human beings instinctively use darkness to hide sin. We assume that if other people cannot see us, reality is somehow suspended.
We associate physical darkness with moral cover.
Going all the way back to Eden, Adam and Eve sinned, and their immediate reaction was to hide behind the foliage of the garden, hoping the physical leaves would block the gaze of the Creator.
But the source insists that the night shines as day to the Creator. The darkness and the light are both alike to him.
He does not need photons to see. He invented photons.
That is a wild thought. He invented the very concept of light.
Right. He who spoke light into existence is not dependent on light to observe his creation. His knowledge is immediate and independent of physical conditions.
What blinds our human eyes does absolutely nothing to his perception.
Nothing at all.
This raises a massive cultural conflict, I think. We live in an era obsessed with digital privacy.
Oh, absolutely.
We use VPNs to mask our IP addresses. We use encrypted messaging apps. We curate our identities online to show only what we want people to see.
We have this modern demand to remain unobserved.
So how does this ancient reality of total exposure clash with our current mindset?
Well, what's fascinating here is that the modern obsession with privacy is really just a technological version of Adam hiding behind the fig leaves.
Wow. Fig leaves with a microchip.
Yeah. We are terrified of being fully known because we know our own guilt. We want to control our image.
But this text strips away every single encrypted wall.
It says your private browser history, your locked doors, your internal resentments, they are all brightly lit before the face of God. You are completely known.
That is an intensely terrifying thought for anyone harboring a secret.
It is meant to be a terrifying thought for the unrepentant rebel. It is a severe moral exposure.
But there is a pivot.
Yes, here's the massive pivot in the text. The exact same presence that terrifies the rebel is the exact same presence that comforts the believer.
Because if he sees everything, he also sees every hidden tear, every quiet act of obedience, every lonely struggle that no human being will ever applaud you for.
That is beautiful. The inescapable exposure becomes an inescapable refuge, depending entirely on your relational standing with the judge.
And that duality of exposure and comfort leads us naturally into how God is present in those extreme places.
Right, because he is not just watching from the corner of the room with a clipboard.
No, he is actively involved.
Yeah.
That brings us to verse 10, where the text introduces the concept of the sovereign grip.
David says, "Even there shall thy hand lead me, and thy right hand shall hold me."
The phrase even there is so heavy.
It really is.
Even at the bottom of the ocean, even in the grave, even in the thickest darkness.
The focus here relies heavily on the Hebrew verb tachazeni.
Tachazini. What does that mean?
It translates to seize, to take hold of, to grasp firmly.
So it is not a weak hold?
No, this is an active, definitive verb. God does not passively hover near his people like a ghost. He actively grasps them.
Let's break down the mechanics of that grip. The source material explicitly uses this linguistic reality to contrast with other theological viewpoints, starting with Arminianism.
Yes, it does.
Let's walk through that contrast without turning it into an attack, just explaining the mechanical difference in how security is viewed.
Fair enough. Arminianism generally teaches that human free will holds the deciding factor in salvation,
Okay.
and that a person could potentially choose to walk away from God and lose their salvation.
So under that framework, your ultimate security relies heavily on your ability to maintain your faith, your ability to hold on to God.
But the source material argues that man cannot escape the sovereign grip of grace by his own fluctuating willpower.
Because if my ultimate security depends on my grip on God, I am going to fail.
Y'all would.
My spiritual hands get sweaty, my spiritual muscles fatigue. I get distracted by my own sin.
That is it, completely. If God's right hand, the hand of strength and authority, actively seizes and holds the believer, then the believer's security does not rely on the strength of their own grip.
It relies entirely on the invincible strength of God's grip on them.
Yes. The texts also apply this concept to contrast with aspects of Roman Catholicism.
How does omnipresence shift the idea of a mediated presence?
Well, the source points out that Roman Catholic theology traditionally places a heavy weight on mediation through human priesthoods and physical sacraments.
Okay, so you go through someone or something to get to God.
Right. But the argument here is that if God is universally present and actively grasping the believer everywhere, then the believer has direct, unmediated access to God's presence at all times.
Oh, I see. You do not need to travel to a specific building or go through a specific human mediator to encounter the presence of God.
Because his hand is already holding you in your living room, in your car, or in a hospital bed.
That brings up a really practical application. How does this grip apply to the concept of human suffering?
That is a crucial point.
Because if you are sitting in an oncology ward waiting on biopsy results, or if you are experiencing a lonely season of exile, you might feel completely abandoned.
The text demands that we look past our fluctuating emotions. A hospital room is never outside the active providence of God.
A lonely exile is not off the grid.
The believer might descend into intense sorrow, but they cannot descend beneath the presence of their God.
Even there shall thy hand lead me.
He guides through the confusion. He preserves in the danger.
It makes me think of a father walking near the edge of a steep cliff with a toddler.
Oh, that is a good visual.
Yeah, so the toddler is holding the father's hand, but the toddler is easily distracted. A butterfly flies by, or the toddler trips over a root.
As toddlers do.
Right. Out of sudden fear or sheer weakness, the child's hand slips. They let go. But the security of that child does not depend on the child's grip.
No, it does not.
The father has a firm, sovereign grip locked around the child's wrist. The father's grasp will not fail, even when the child's grasp completely falters.
That is a brilliant illustration of takazeni. The preservation of the saints relies on the sovereign father refusing to let go, no matter how much the child stumbles or panics near the edge of the cliff.
But that brings up a massive question for me. Let's play devil's advocate here.
I am ready.
If God is gripping us this tightly, and if he is universally present, holding the molecules of our bodies together, why do the vast majority of people, even believers, feel absolutely nothing?
That is the big tension.
Why can I walk through an entire Tuesday and not feel a single ounce of divine presence?
That is the crucial tension, and the text addresses this directly. It calls it the Jacob problem.
The Jacob problem. We are talking about the story of Jacob in the wilderness of Bethel, right?
Yes. Let's set the scene for the listener.
Okay, Jacob was a con artist. He had just stolen his brother's birthright through deception, and he was running for his life.
He was not on a spiritual retreat looking for God.
Definitely not. He falls asleep with his head on a literal rock, and God interrupts his sleep with this staggering vision of a ladder reaching to heaven.
And when Jacob wakes up from the vision, he makes a fascinating confession.
What does he say?
He says, "Surely the Lord is in this place, and I knew it not."
And I knew it not. He was standing right in the middle of the presence of God. He was surrounded by it, and he was completely ignorant of it until the vision woke him up.
The texts use Jacob's experience to explain a sharp theological distinction. There's a massive difference between the ontological presence of God and the subjective manifestation of that presence.
Break down the mechanics of those two categories for me.
Well, the presence of God is a constant fact. It is objectively true whether anyone notices it or not.
God is present in a bustling city street just as much as he is present in an empty desert.
Exactly. I mean, spot on. But the manifestation of that presence is subjective. It occurs when the human soul is actually made aware of the reality that surrounds them.
So the presence is always there, like radio waves filling a room. But the manifestation is the moment our internal receiver is actually turned on to pick up the audio.
That is a great way to view it. And the sources assert that spiritual blindness is the default human condition.
We are born blind to it.
Since the fall of man, we are born oblivious to the divine reality holding our atoms together. We are spiritually dead to it.
So how do we become unblind? If we are dead, how does the manifestation happen?
The texts argue that a monergistic work of grace is required to open blind eyes.
Let's unpack that word, monergism.
Monergism means God works entirely alone to accomplish the awakening.
Alone, so we do not help.
Think of physical CPR. A medically dead person cannot resuscitate themselves. They cannot assist the paramedic.
Right, they're just lying there.
The paramedic must apply an external force to restart the heart. The Holy Spirit must sovereignly act upon the dead human heart to awaken it to the reality of God's presence.
And this touches on a specific theological stance in the source material regarding how the Holy Spirit does that awakening today. The text firmly advocates for a cessationist view.
Yes. Cessationism is the belief that the miraculous revelatory gifts of the early church, like new mystical visions, prophetic dreams, or speaking in tongues, ceased.
They stopped after the apostolic era and the completion of the New Testament canon.
Right. The source insists that God does not manifest himself today through new mystical experiences or subjective voices in your head.
So we aren't supposed to be waiting around for a burning bush or a vision of a ladder like Jacob had.
No, we are using what we already have.
We're using the written word.
The Holy Spirit illuminates the scriptures. He takes the objective truth of the Bible and makes it burn in the heart of the believer.
The manifestation is an awakening to the truth of the ancient text, not some extra-biblical hallucination.
Reading a book is not settling for second best. It is the ordained mechanism for the Spirit's work today.
Okay, but I have to push back here. I see a glaring logical problem.
Lay it on me.
If it is entirely up to God's monergistic sovereign grace to open our eyes, and if he only does it when he chooses, doesn't that just create a hyper-Calvinist passivity?
I see where you're going.
I mean, why should we do anything? Why read the Bible? Why pray? Why set an alarm clock to go to church if we were just sitting around waiting for God to drop a sovereign lightning bolt on our brains?
The source material anticipates that exact pushback. It issues a severe warning against falling into the trap of fatalism.
Okay, so fatalism is the danger.
It argues that obsessively prying into the secret decrees of God's sovereign election creates proud, sterile theologians, not humble saints.
So we are not supposed to try and reverse engineer God's sovereignty.
No. The hidden things belong to God. The revealed things belong to us. And the text calls for active obedience.
While God's grace is sovereign, he has ordained that this grace flows through specific, ordinary channels.
God ordains the ends, but he also ordains the means. The texts call this the cultivation of spiritual receptivity.
Spiritual receptivity. Okay, going back to our radio analogy, it means we have to tune our dials to the correct frequency, even if God is the one broadcasting the signal and providing the electricity.
You do not manufacture the signal, but you are commanded to turn on the receiver and sit in the chair.
You cultivate receptivity through disciplined obedience.
You read the word, you pray, you sit in silence, you actively seek his face through the mechanisms he provided.
Which leads directly to the question of how we cultivate this receptivity in a culture that absolutely hates silence.
Oh, we run from silence.
Think about your average day. We demand instant gratification. If a video does not hook us in 3 seconds, we swipe to the next thing.
We want a jolt. We are a microwave culture.
And that cultural impatience has completely infected the modern church, which brings us to the text's severe critique of contemporary evangelicalism.
The sources diagnose the church as suffering from a widespread pragmatic disease.
A pragmatic disease, meaning the philosophy of whatever works, whatever gets the biggest crowd, whatever spikes the metrics, do that.
The critique argues that the church has traded the slow, ordinary means of grace for machine-age corporate growth methods.
Let's clearly define the ordinary means of grace for context. We are talking about the public reading and preaching of the Word,
Believers' baptism.
taking communion, public and private prayer, and church discipline. The slow, steady, incredibly unflashy habits of the Christian faith.
Why are those so boring to the modern mind?
Yeah, why?
Because they require patience. They do not produce an instant, measurable dopamine hit.
The text lists the symptoms of abandoning those tools. It points to entertainment-driven worship,
Where the Sunday service feels more like a concert or a theatrical production designed to entertain an audience rather than a congregation gathering to address a holy God.
The sources mention seeker-sensitive models, where the entire liturgy is redesigned to ensure an unregenerate visitor is never offended or bored.
And it highlights a reliance on psychological manipulation.
Like creating a specific emotional mood with dim lighting, haze machines, and specific chord progressions.
Over a reliance on sola scriptura, scripture alone.
Now, as we always do here on the Deep Dive, I want to add a disclaimer. The source material also links this decline to specific ideological companions, naming liberal theology and critical race theory.
Yes, the author ties those together.
And we are just reporting what is in the text. We aren't taking a stance on these specific political or cultural frameworks here, but the author clearly views them as symptoms of abandoning historic scriptural authority.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the argument is that these pragmatic methods are a desperate attempt to manufacture a fake manifestation of God's presence because we lack the discipline for true spiritual receptivity.
We want the adrenaline rush of a rock concert, and we label that adrenaline the Holy Spirit.
It is like the difference between a medical defibrillator and an oxygen tank.
Ooh, explain that.
Pragmatism is like putting a defibrillator on a healthy heart. You push the button, and it causes a massive, violent contraction of the muscle.
It looks incredibly impressive. It looks like life.
But if you keep shocking a healthy heart, you actually damage the tissue. The ordinary means of grace are like the slow, unseen process of oxygen entering the bloodstream.
You don't feel it happening. It isn't flashy. But over the span of decades, it is the only thing that sustains cellular life.
That analogy hits the core issue. And the underlying theological failure of the defibrillator method is that it assumes God is distant.
Explain that. How does a fog machine imply God is distant?
Well, if you feel the need to substitute spectacle for reverence, if you feel you must summon God down from heaven using loud music or emotional manipulation, you are functionally denying Psalm 139.
Wow. You are acting as if God is an absentee landlord who needs to be lured back into the building with a catchy hook and a good light show.
It completely ignores the reality that he is already universally present, actively observing everything you are doing.
You do not need to yell through a megaphone to get the attention of someone who is already sitting inside your own living room.
The author points the finger at those modern frameworks as symptoms of this shift. And whether you align with those cultural frameworks or not, the author's core architectural critique holds up.
Which is that whenever you abandon historic scriptural authority, you have to replace it with cultural mechanisms. You have to find a new way to stay relevant.
When you lose the conviction that the ancient word is sufficient, you must constantly reinvent your methodology to match the current cultural mood. It is an exhausting treadmill.
And the texts point out that all of this striving, all of this frantic corporate growth methodology actually misses the most staggering historical fact of the Christian faith.
We don't need to build a massive tower to reach a distant God.
Because God already descended to reach us. Which brings our analysis to its theological climax.
We are shifting now to the Christological fulfillment of Psalm 139. Everything David wrote about the universal, terrifying, and comforting presence of God finds its ultimate physical expression in the Incarnation.
Emmanuel, God with us.
The text says that Christ fulfills every extreme of David's psalm.
Let's look at the mechanics of the Incarnation regarding omnipresence. Did God shrink himself down to fit into a human body? Did he vacate the rest of the universe to fit inside the womb of Mary?
No, and this touches on the hypostatic union, the union of divine and human natures in the one person of Christ.
So he didn't give up his omnipresence.
The eternal Son did not cease to fill the universe when he took on flesh. The divine nature remained omnipresent, upholding galaxies and keeping the planets in orbit.
While simultaneously uniting with a true human nature in a specific, localized place.
The creator of the cosmos, who could not be contained by the heaven of heavens, lay crying for milk in a feeding trough in Bethlehem.
That is the ultimate mind-bending paradox. The inescapable God became a localized man. And he didn't just fulfill the concept of being physically present, he fulfilled the terrifying extremes David talked about. Let's look at the cross.
David talked about the illusion of darkness and how darkness cannot hide us from the gaze of God. At the cross, Christ endured the absolute literal darkness of Calvary.
But more than physical darkness, he endured the terrifying judgment of God's moral presence against sin.
We talked earlier about how God's presence is a terror to the rebel because it exposes sin. His holiness demands justice.
On the cross, Jesus drank the cup of that terrifying presence.
He stood in the place of his people beneath the full, unfiltered weight of divine justice. He did not hide, he did not flee.
He absorbed the holy wrath of the omnipresent God so that believers would never have to experience that wrath.
Because of the cross, the believer will only ever experience God's presence as reconciled fellowship, never as condemnation.
And what about Sheol? David said, "If I make my bed in Sheol, behold, thou art there."
Christ actually descended into the grave. He experienced the cold custody of physical death. He entered the territory of the ultimate human fear.
But death could not hold the author of life.
His physical resurrection guarantees that the grave is no longer a zone outside of God's victory. For the believer, descending into death is simply an entrance into the conscious, joyous presence of Christ.
And finally, the ascension. Christ ascends back to the highest heaven, fulfilling forcing today. If I ascend up into heaven, thou art there.
According to his human nature, Christ is physically exalted at the right hand of the Father. But according to his divine nature, he remains omnipresent. And he is specifically present with his church through his Spirit.
He stated clearly, "Lo, I am with you always, even unto the end of the world."
He is present, applying the word, holding his people with that sovereign grip we discussed earlier.
The pursuit of God is not us trying to navigate a map to find a hidden deity who is playing a cosmic game of hide and seek.
Not at all.
So what does this all mean? In the end, it means the pursuit of God is only possible because God first pursued humanity in Christ.
We do not have to manufacture a spectacle with lighting and marketing strategies.
Because the mediator has already bridged the infinite gap. The network is secure because Christ established the connection with his own blood. The requirement is not to build a better program. The requirement is to surrender to the God who is already in the room.
Let's summarize the core takeaways from these dense, fascinating texts for you, the listener.
Yes, let's bring it all together.
First, God is infinite, immense, and universally present. There is no edge to his reality. He sustains the very space you occupy.
Second, you cannot escape his spirit, whether by height, depth, distance, or the illusion of darkness.
Third, for the believer, his sovereign grip, takazini, holds you secure. Your safety relies on his strength, not your fluctuating emotions or willpower.
And fourth, true worship requires abandoning the frantic pragmatism of the modern era and embracing the steady, ordinary means of grace to cultivate spiritual receptivity.
That sums it up perfectly.
And as we close, I want to leave you with one final thought to mull over regarding the practical reality of all this.
The text calls us to live coram Deo.
A Latin phrase meaning before the face of God. Think about your schedule tomorrow. Think about sitting in frustrating traffic or folding laundry or sitting through a tedious meeting at work.
If the creator of the entire universe is intimately, actively observing and sustaining the very physical space you occupy right now,
how does the most mundane, frustrating, entirely ordinary task you have to do tomorrow suddenly hold eternal, absolute weight?
the GPS pin isn't just showing where you are located, it is showing exactly where he is meeting you.
Thank you for joining this session of Reformed Thinking. Keep seeking, keep reading, and keep living in the light of the present King.